Okay, so now we're going to be looking at the documents that are corresponding to Chapter 7 that was discussed earlier. The first document I want to point out here is the document Common Sense by Thomas Paine. This document is essential to us and to our understanding of this unit because it's one of the big things that pushes people towards independence in the 1770s, in 1776, in fact. And why is that, right? It's because Paine is so successful in compelling people to connect to these larger ideas of what a government is supposed to be. I'll ask you to remember from a couple of weeks ago where we talked a little bit about John Locke, right? And I hope you remember that John Locke was the guy, an English philosopher in the late 17th century, who argued that government was formed to protect your life, your liberty, and your property. Thomas Jefferson will change that, uh, well, in the period that we're talking about here, right? But 80 years after Locke wrote those famous words. And when Locke writes those words, that changes the way people view government. That it's no longer government is existing essentially to preserve itself, but rather government is there to preserve its people. And it changes the way people view um, the role of the government and their relationship with the government. And then we talked a little bit about the Whigs yesterday, or when in the earlier video, and the Whigs would sort of be this group of people who follow along with that belief. In the 1770s, this transplanted Brit, Thomas Paine, who actually moves up to, well, moves to the United States and then moves, he lives here in New York and he lives up in Westchester, or what today is Westchester. He writes this famous piece, right? So you're going to read this on your own and I'm going to post it. But you can read here, he talks about society and every state is a blessing, but government can even be the best state is but a necessary evil. So he admits government has to exist and it's a necessary evil. Now, in the middle here, he talks about the design of the end of government is like sort of the state of nature type of thing. Where does government come from and why does government form? However, when we move to the bottom of this piece here, this is where he really, and this is excerpted, so I've taken chunks um, here. In this lower portion, what he's pointing out here is, if this is what we say government is for, and we can all agree on this, then what is government here? And he says, right, but as the colony increases, the public concerns will increase likewise, and the distance, right, 3,000 miles, at which the members may be separated will render it too inconvenient for all of them to meet on every occasion as at first, when their numbers were small, their inhabitants near, and their public concerns few and trifling. He's pointing out that this may have worked at some point, but we are in a stage now that's different. Our concerns are growing, and we need to be more attentive. And then this is sort of the punch in the gut for the British, right? He's arguing here it's essential for the colonies to control themselves. And again, this is one of the big pieces that sort of convinces people to join the patriot cause. All right. So this document's a great document. I really hope you like it and enjoy it. So this is written in 1776. Another document written in 1776, and you'll see this here. I'm sure I hope you all recognize the beginning, the unanimous Declaration of the 13 United States of America, right? So the Declaration of Independence, right? Thomas Jefferson picks up on that idea, right? These Lockean Whig ideas that look at the sort of role of government. Now, Jefferson is brilliant, and Jefferson really writes a lot here about sort of Enlightenment ideas and continues those on. So let's just talk a little bit here about sort of what he's saying. So when in the course of human events, it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political bonds which have connected them with another, and to assume among the natures, among the powers of the earth, the separate and equal stations. Right. So again, he's talking sort of that there's this sort of kind of Aristotelian things out there, right? That we believe that there are these sort of courses of human events, that the nature's laws are governing us, and that we need to be, we are, nature says we need to be separated. And then obviously the next part, we hold these truths to be self-evident. Self-evident is really a kind of an interesting term, right? Um, Something that is self-evident is something that need not be mentioned. Well, if it need not be mentioned, why are we going to mention it? But that's a little bit more of a deeper dive into the Declaration of Independence than maybe we need to do right here. But we hold these rights to be unalienable rights. People are endowed by the Creator with unalienable rights. Again, this idea that all people are entitled to this. Now, again, there's obviously hypocrisy here, right? Because Jefferson is a famous slave owner. Many of the founding fathers, of the people who signed this document, are slaveholders. So obviously there's an inherent hypocrisy, and not even just for the slaves, right? For women as well. Women don't have the right to vote. So again, these are all sort of things that are ironic here. Now, the part that I've left out in this document is what are called the list of grievances, a list of 20 plus things that the king has done wrong, and for which the colonists believe they are able, or by which the things that the colonists say that they can separate themselves from the British. I think this is those things are sort of the justifications, obviously. And then finally here down here I have given you sort of what we officially call the official Declaration of Independence. This is the portion of the document where the citizens of the United States are separating themselves from Great Britain. I want to point out that obviously this was not a foregone conclusion that the Declaration of Independence was going to happen. It was really more about the events that led up to this that sort of compelled people. Paine, and also the justification, right? I mean, both Paine and Jefferson here are using these ideas that government is there to protect the individual. And since the government was not doing that, then there needed to be independence. All right, so let's jump down here. So we talk. I haven't necessarily talked about the Constitution, and I do want to talk about that. So I'm just spacing things out here. All right. So let's look at this. Right. So James Madison. James Madison was the first, was the major person who wrote the United States Constitution. So it was written in 1787. It was sort of ratified in 1787, and then it went to the states. Then that they approved it sort of continuously through from 1787 through 1789. And then once it was officially ratified, one of the things that happens is James Madison is one of the things that sort of compels other people within the United States to agree to the Constitution is the Bill of Rights. So then Madison writes that. I just want to briefly turn our attention back to the slides for a second. So when we officially have the Constitution being established, right, there are, as I mentioned earlier, there's disagreements between the sizes of the states, right? So that you have large states, you have small states, southern states and northern states. Southern states are more agrarian and rural. Northern states are more cosmopolitan and industrial. And because of that, what you have happening is major disagreements over the strength of the Constitution. Basically, what happens to become the first political parties of the United States. They meet, the Constitutional Convention meets in 1787 in Annapolis, Maryland, and they work on this new Constitution. Scrap the Articles of Confederation. We talked about the failures there, and they start to come up with it, right? So there needs to be a compromise about this, sometimes called, and the Great Compromise, which is sort of the one that really is important, is established by the delegation from Connecticut, sometimes called the Connecticut Plan. Connecticut's called the Constitution State for that reason. And this is an agree. This is what ultimately happens, right? So in the United States, we have a lower house of Congress, the House of Representatives, based on population. So that was something that the big states wanted. At the time, Virginia, Pennsylvania, Massachusetts, they were the three big states, and they wanted their representation to be larger. But then the smaller states didn't want a sort of disproportion going to the bigger states. So that's where we get the Senate from, so that every state has two representatives. The Bill of Rights is also this another type of compromise, right? So for a lot of people, and I'll let you read Madison's justification for it, which is here. But I want to just point out that why the Bill of Rights. The Bill of Rights are important because they're what we call, so the collection of the 10 First Amendments that are passed finally in 1791 are both positive rights and negative rights. So what does that mean? Positive rights are rights to do something, and the negative rights are rights from something. So if you look at the Bill of Rights, right, the First Amendment says you have the right to life. You have the right to the freedom of religion, freedom of assembly, freedom of speech, freedom of press. Those are freedoms to do, freedoms of expression of those things. Then you have the Fourth Amendment, that is a freedom from unjust searches and seizures, right? So there are both these things that give you the ability to do things, freedoms of speech, to speak, but then protections from unnecessary searches and seizures. So it's an interesting piece, right? Anyway, so I hope this sort of little discussion on the ideas of the revolution are important or helpful in understanding the larger aspects of it. And if you have any questions, please feel free to let me know.